要不写。
All right, so what is a fetch? Well, fetch is just an API that lets you make HTTP requests to the backend and handle the response. And so it does what the XHR object does, but in a cleaner, more developer-friendly way. The setup for a fetch request is less complicated compared to the XHR. You don't have to create a whole separate object and open it and send it and all that stuff. Handling the response is similar, though. Instead of creating a handler function and then loading it in as a value, you use a then chain and use the callback as the handler function. You'll see in a second. And so the great thing about fetch is it uses promises. All right, so let's build the fetch. Fetch is really, really easy to use, a lot easier than the XHR. We just use the keyword fetch and then the URL. We're going to use the HTTP, ://http bin.org. All this does is it's a dummy site that sets up these routes, and you get to test your fetches, test your get and your post requests. We're going to do a get first. So we need the get, we have the fetch, and let's run this. Again, it's really easy. So rex, and then we'll say 555, and we submit, and we get absolutely nothing. Now, why didn't we get anything? Well, in the intro, I told you that fetches were promises. And so what we've done is we have a promise that's resolved, but we didn't handle. If you don't know promises, I have a video. I'll link it in the description. We haven't handled the response properly with a .then. So we need a .then. So this is the response, and this is JSON. If you don't know what JSON is, I'll have a video in the future. Just understand that they've sent data back in a specific format. We need to convert this format into a JavaScript format. So we use the Json method. So res.json. And so now we're returning a proper JSON object. We need to catch that object again. So we need another then. So this is going to be the data. You know what? Let me show you first what the response is, what the JSON or the non-parsed response is. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to log out their response like this. Console.log and the res. Again, this isn't the unparsed response. So we're going to say, there we go. Let's go res fetch form, handle form submit. Oh, you know what we're doing? We're putting this outside of the handle form submit. That's why it's executing right away. Let me just show you this first though. So this is the response. All of this stuff, that's what you get from the server. When we run the res.json, it takes the meat of the response that we actually want, which is in the body, and then it gives us just that. It doesn't give us all of this stuff here. So let me do this properly and put this guy into the handle form submit like that. And so we're going to parse this guy. Let me clean up the code. Sorry, that was the keyboard stuff. So we're going to parse this code properly. We don't need this line here. We need that. We don't need the semicolon. And we don't need the stuff like this. All right, so we've parsed it. Now we need to handle that parse. So this is what we're looking for. This is the gold here. And we're just going to console.log that data. And now when we submit a form, let's say rex 555, submit, we get this guy here. This is the data we want. Args, headers, origin, URL. Now, our GET request sends data through the URL. It would normally show up. So what the site does, it just spits your data right back at you so you know it successfully went through. It would have showed up in the args if we actually gave it data. So we captured the data. We didn't pass it to the fetch. And how do we do that? From the last video, but I'll explain it. We have a query string. A query string are key value pairs. I'll show you what it looks like. And so we have a new URL search params. I'll explain this line of code in a second. New form data like that. And then we have, what's the form? User form. That, and then we need to cast it to a string like that. So all this line does, it creates a key value pair called a query string. Well, in a specific format. Let me show you what that looks like. Console.log query string save. So all this line does is it converts this data, form data, into a proper query string. And that query string looks like that right there. username equals rex. So this is the key right here. The equals is the delimiter. It's like a colon. And then with the value rex and the ands are just separating different key value pairs. So now that we have the actual query string, we can write our fetch properly. I'm going to use string templates because it's a lot easier. So we're going to convert these guys into backticks like that. And then we're just going to add the question mark, which tells the URL that this is, we're about to insert a query string, and then we're going to insert it like this, query string like that. So now when we send the submit in the args, we'll get the actual data we submitted. So we get, here we go. In the args, we get our PIN number 555 and our username rex. So that was just a GET request with fetch. And as you can see, it's a lot easier than the XHR. We didn't have to create a new object, open the object, load a function handler, and then call the send method. Just a one simple line with fetch, and then it's a promise. So you need to catch or handle the response, parse the response, and then move on. So let's create a post request with this fetch guy. Now, in the last video, I made a bit of a mistake. I told you that when we sent data with the XHR, saying it's just xhr.send like that this right here, xhr.send form data, that was the same as, I think it was XHR, and then we just did a send. Anyway, so I equivocated the form data with sending JSON data. Form data is not JSON data. It's not, for those of you who don't know what JSON is, it's not this stuff here. Form data is not in this. It's not key value pairs like this. And so in the last video, I said you could just, instead of converting this query string into an object and then sending the form data, that you could just simply send the form data. You can't do that if you're specifying I'll show you what I mean in a second, but just understand that form data is not JSON data. So we need to handle that. So let's send a post request with this fetch. We don't need a query string. What we need is form data. So we don't need the new URL search params. We still need the new form data, and we don't need to cast it into a string. And so let me show you what form data is quickly. You're not going to be able to see the actual data, but it's a different beast. It's not JSON. It's not an object. It's its own thing. So let's just say we don't need that. It's going to cause an error. So this is what form data looks like before it's converted either into a JSON object or a query string. So submit. Again, it's its own little object. And it allows you to append data, key value pairs, delete key value pairs, get them, see whether or not they have them. So here's the keys, here are the values. You can loop through it. So again, it's not JSON data, like I said in the last video, and it's not a string. It's its own thing. And so when we send that, what the fetch is going to expect, what the server is going to expect is form data content types. And so the second argument of a fetch, that's where you put all the properties. And so we have an object, and so we're going to send a post, not a get. And then we're going to go headers or header. That's another object. And the cool thing about fetch is if you leave out the content type like this, it will try to intelligently predict what the content type is. But just to be safe, we're going to say the content type is, I think it's multi-part form data like that. And then in the body is where we have the form data. We'll do it like that. Again, in the last video, what I showed you was we converted this form data into an actual key value pair, and then we stringified it. And so the site that we were pinging, which I think was the same site, it was expecting JSON. But you can't do this with form data. You'd have to convert the form data into a JavaScript object and then stringify that into form data. So right now it's going to expect a multi-part form data content type. I'll show you where it shows up in the response. So rex 555, and then we submit, and we get this guy here. All right, so remember the last submit we had, which was a get, it showed us our data in the args. There's no get, there's no query string in the fetch right here. So there are no args. There's no JSON. We didn't send it as JSON, and so there's no JSON. We sent it as multi-part form data, and so that's where the server got it. So it got it in the form property, pin number 555, username rex. And so one thing we haven't been doing, which you need to do as a web developer, is we're not checking status codes. We're assuming that everything's always going tickety-boo and this stuff. And so we need to check the status codes. How you do that is the response. Let me see if they show it here. The response comes back with a property called status. Do they have it? They don't have it here. Maybe it's in headers. Status. No. All right. Anyway, so the response, all response objects from servers come back with a status code. And so we need to check that before we move on into our code. Because if something goes wrong and we don't check and we're assuming that everything went right, we're going to break our code. So we literally just check the response object, and it has a property called status. Let me print that out for you first. And you guys know what these status codes, well, some of them are. Res.status, we'll console.log that guy. Console.log res status, and then we'll just comment out these two lines for now. And actually, we'll just return that. Return that. All right. So the universal code for everything went tickety-boo, everything went A-OK is the status code 200. Let me get rid of this 69 line here. 555. There, 200. So 200 means everything went great. Like you sent data or you sent a request, the request went back, and everything went perfectly fine. Their status, so 200, that range, 200 to 299, they're not all used. You don't have like 205, 206, 207. But the range 200 means everything went okay. 300, I think things need to be modified, but everything still went okay. 400s, you guys know that. 404s, things like that. And 500s are like internal server errors. And so we need to check the status before we move on in the code. So we're just going to say something like, if res.status is equal to 200, then we'll return the JSON like that. So then we'll parse the data. Because if the status wasn't 200, it was 500, there'd be nothing to parse, and that would break our code. So we need to always handle the responses. There's the status codes. Else, let's say throw new error, and we'll say something went wrong. Now, very important to note, just because you get a status code of 500, which means something happened on their end that broke, it doesn't mean, well, let me show you. When we throw an error in a promise, like this, that error, oh, we didn't do that. So when you have promises, remember to catch. You always need a catch. You always need to handle your errors. So we'll just console.log the error like that. So let's say something, so just because they send some sort of bad status code to us, let's submit. And so this throw new error, it went to the catch. Something went wrong. Status codes like 500, 404, they're still treated as successful. What this thing is testing for is whether or not you made a connection with the server and whether or not something got sent back. It might be 500, it might be 404, but something went back, and so that's counted as a success. So your catches will not catch 500s and 404s. So normally what I would do is just do a switch and do res.status, and then you just do a bunch of cases. So case 200, do this. Case 404, do that. These bad, quote unquote, bad status codes, they're not treated as errors. Errors are things which break your code. I know I'm going around in circles, but you need to handle your status codes. You can't just write code thinking that everything's going A-OK. And so that's what a fetch is. It's a cleaner, more comfortable way of doing XHRs. Whereas you had like 4 or 5 steps in XHR, open, load, loads, sends. All you do with a fetch is this one call, plus the thens, plus the catches. But as you can see, it's just a lot easier, a lot more intuitive to work with. So give a like if this video gave you any sort of help, comments down below, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Share the video if you feel the need to, and I'll see you guys in the next one.